Alexander Kane spent Christmas Eve tangled in silk sheets at the Regency Hotel with his 26-year-old marketing coordinator, while his wife Diana prepared Christmas morning alone with their twin daughters in their sprawling estate in Millbrook Valley. He thought he was finally living the life he deserved, successful, desired, free from the mundane responsibilities that had weighed him down for years. What Alexander didn't know was that by the time he returned home on Christmas morning, expecting to slip back into his role as the devoted family man, his wife and 3-year-old twins would have vanished without a trace, taking with them a secret inheritance worth $45 million and evidence that would destroy everything he had built. Before we dive back in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is something truly special I can't wait to share. If you love stories where arrogance meets devastating consequences, where the hunter becomes the hunted, and where justice comes in ways the guilty never see coming, hit that like button and subscribe, because this disappearance will reveal how one woman turned her husband's betrayal into the most perfectly orchestrated revenge in legal history. The grandfather clock in the marble foyer of the Kane mansion chimed midnight as fresh snow began to dust the perfectly manicured lawns of Pinehurst Estates, the most exclusive gated community in Westchester County. Inside the 18,000-square-foot Tudor Revival mansion, Diana Kane sat cross-legged on the heated marble floor of their great room, her chestnut hair catching the warm glow from the 14-foot Norwegian spruce she had decorated entirely by herself, each ornament placed with the careful precision of someone who had learned that perfection was the only acceptable standard in the Kane household. Hey Toxic Truths family! I am very thankful to Phyllis Ashby, who bought a membership for this channel. She is also the first member of this channel. I am very pleased with you. If you also want me to make a community post about you and talk about you using your name, please buy a membership and send me a super gift. This is very helpful to me in making interesting videos for you. Thank you. One more thing. Don't miss any of today's videos because today's videos are very interesting. Now continue the video. At 29, Diana still possessed the elegant beauty that had first captivated Alexander 7 years ago when she was a rising star in international law at Columbia University. Tonight, she wore a cream cashmere dress that cost more than most people earned in a month, but the designer fabric couldn't hide the exhaustion etched around her emerald eyes, or the way her hands trembled slightly as she wrapped the final Christmas presents with military precision. The twins, Lily and Rose, had finally fallen asleep in their matching canopy beds upstairs, their golden curls spread across Egyptian cotton pillowcases like spun silk. At 3 years old, they were beginning to ask the questions that pierced Diana's heart like shards of glass. "Where'd Daddy go?" had become Lily's constant refrain, while Rose would wander through their vast home calling, "Daddy home soon?" in tones that grew more desperate with each unanswered plea. Diana's phone buzzed against the Italian marble coffee table, the screen illuminating with yet another text from her husband, "Major client crisis. Singapore deal falling apart. Won't make it home tonight. Sorry. Merry Christmas." She stared at the message, her reflection ghost-like in the darkened screen. This was the 6th international emergency this month, the 9th time he'd missed putting the girls to bed, the 15th elaborate excuse in what had become an endless symphony of deception. But Diana Kane wasn't the naive young law student Alexander had married. She had graduated summa cum laude from Columbia Law, had worked for 3 years at one of Manhattan's most prestigious international firms before Alexander convinced her that staying home with their children was what's best for the family. She spoke 5 languages fluently, held a master's degree in international business law, and possessed a photographic memory that had made her legendary in legal circles. She knew exactly what kind of emergency required designer lingerie charges on his credit card, what kind of Singapore deal necessitated reservations at intimate French restaurants he'd never taken her to. As Diana walked through their home, a monument to Alexander's success as one of the city's most ruthless corporate attorneys specializing in hostile takeovers, she observed it with the clinical detachment of someone preparing for war. Rothko paintings hung in the hallway, a custom Steinway dominated the music room, and Persian rugs worth more than luxury cars covered floors of imported Carrara marble. Every surface gleamed with the attention of a full household staff, every room arranged with the precision of interior designers who charged 6 figures for their expertise. It was breathtaking. It was flawless. It was completely devoid of genuine happiness. Tonight, however, Diana felt something she hadn't experienced in months, a crystalline clarity that cut through the fog of denial she'd been living in. As she placed the last perfectly wrapped gift under their tree, she realized that the woman who had spent years making excuses for her husband's absence, who had convinced herself that his distance was temporary stress, who had believed that love and patience could heal any wound, that woman was about to disappear forever. In her place stood someone far more dangerous, a brilliant legal mind with nothing left to lose and everything to protect. Someone who had been gathering evidence while Alexander thought she was simply being the perfect wife. Someone who knew exactly how to make a man who thought he was untouchable discover just how wrong he could be. Outside, snow continued to fall on Pinehurst Estates, covering the world in pristine white. Inside, Diana Kane began the final preparations for the most spectacular disappearance in the history of Westchester County. What Alexander would discover on Christmas morning wouldn't just be an empty house. It would be the complete and total destruction of the life he thought he controlled. The Kane family portrait that graced the mahogany mantelpiece of their great room told the story of American success that magazines loved to celebrate. Alexander stood tall and commanding in his custom-tailored Brioni suit, his dark hair perfectly styled with just enough silver at the temples to suggest wisdom and experience. At 35, he possessed the kind of magnetic presence that made juries hang on his every word and opposing counsel second-guess their strategies before he even opened his mouth. His law firm, Kane and Associates, occupied an entire floor of a gleaming Manhattan high-rise, where he specialized in international corporate law and had built his reputation on dismantling companies with surgical precision. Diana stood beside him in the photograph, radiant in a navy Valentino dress that complemented her striking features, her chestnut hair swept into an elegant chignon that spoke of effortless sophistication. The photographer had captured her mid-laugh, her emerald eyes sparkling with genuine joy as she gazed at her husband with obvious adoration. She looked like the perfect attorney's wife, educated, gracious, devoted to both her family and her charitable work with the Westchester Children's Foundation. Lily and Rose, barely 2 years old when the photo was taken, sat nestled between their parents wearing matching ivory silk dresses with tiny pearl buttons. Rose clutched her favorite stuffed rabbit while Lily reached toward the camera with chubby fingers, both girls displaying the kind of angelic beauty that made strangers stop them on the street. Their identical sapphire eyes sparkled with the pure joy that only toddlers possessed, completely trusting in the security of their perfect world. The photograph had been featured in Manhattan Elite magazine just 6 months ago, accompanying an article titled, "Power Couple: How the Kanes Balance Success and Family." The piece had described their marriage as a partnership built on mutual respect and shared values, praising Alexander's dedication to his family despite his demanding career and highlighting Diana's decision to step back from her own promising legal career to focus on motherhood and philanthropy. What the article didn't mention was how Diana had sacrificed her position as the youngest associate ever offered partnership at Morrison, Blackwell, and Hart to support Alexander's ambitions. It didn't discuss how she spent most evenings alone, managing bedtime routines and midnight feedings while Alexander worked late into the night on cases that seemed to grow more demanding by the month. The magazine hadn't captured the way she sometimes stood at their bedroom window at 2 a.m., watching for headlights that came later and later, when they came at all. The Kane estate itself was a testament to Alexander's meteoric rise in the legal world. Set on 12 acres of pristinely landscaped grounds in Pinehurst Estates, the Tudor Revival mansion boasted 8 bedrooms, 10 bathrooms, a state-of-the-art kitchen that had been featured in Architectural Digest, and a wine cellar stocked with vintages worth more than most people's homes. The infinity pool overlooked rolling hills that remained green year-round thanks to an elaborate irrigation system, while the tennis court and 3-car garage housed Alexander's collection of luxury vehicles. Inside, every detail spoke of wealth and refined taste. The great room featured a hand-carved limestone fireplace imported from a 16th-century French chateau. The library contained first-edition legal texts and literary classics bound in leather that had never been opened, arranged more for their visual impact than their intellectual value. Fresh flowers arrived weekly from the city's most exclusive florist, replacing arrangements that were still perfect but no longer aligned with Diana's color schemes. Diana's daily routine reflected the lifestyle that Manhattan Elite had celebrated so enthusiastically. She woke at 6 a.m. to the sound of Lily and Rose chattering in their nursery, their voices bright with the excitement that made every morning feel like Christmas to them. After preparing their breakfast, organic fruit cut into perfect shapes, steel-cut oats with honey, fresh juice squeezed from oranges delivered daily from a specialty grocer, she would dress them in coordinated outfits that cost more than most children's entire wardrobes. Their mornings were filled with structured activities. Music lessons with an instructor who traveled from Lincoln Center, art classes in the converted studio that overlooked their gardens, and carefully supervised playdates with other children from similarly privileged families. Diana documented every milestone with professional photography sessions, creating albums that would have impressed the most demanding perfectionist. Lunch was served in the breakfast nook that offered panoramic views of their grounds, followed by precisely timed naps in nurseries that looked like something from a fairy tale. The afternoons brought more enriching activities: nature walks through their private gardens, educational games designed to stimulate developing minds, and story time in the library surrounded by books in multiple languages. But it was the evenings that revealed the growing cracks in their perfect facade. Diana would prepare elaborate dinners in their restaurant-quality kitchen, setting the formal dining room table with baccarat crystal and Hermes china, hoping that Alexander would arrive in time to share the meal with his family. More often than not, she found herself eating alone while the twins played nearby, their constant questions about Daddy's absence becoming harder to answer with convincing explanations. "Daddy working late again?" Lily would ask with the intuitive wisdom that children possessed, her small face scrunched with confusion as she looked at his empty chair at the head of their dining room table. "Yes, sweetheart," Diana would reply, forcing brightness into her voice while cutting their food into perfect bite-sized pieces. "Daddy has very important work helping people with their businesses." Rose, more sensitive to emotional undercurrents, would toddle over to Diana during these solitary dinners and pat her mother's leg with tiny hands, as if sensing the loneliness that no amount of luxury could alleviate. "Mama sad?" she would ask with heartbreaking directness. "No, baby," Diana would lie, lifting Rose onto her lap and breathing in the sweet scent of her daughter's hair. "Mama's just thinking about what wonderful adventures we'll have tomorrow." The bedtime routine that followed was Diana's favorite part of each day, the only time when their life felt genuinely perfect. She would run lavender-scented baths in the twins' ensuite bathroom, washing their hair with gentle shampoos that cost more per ounce than champagne. Afterward, she would dress them in matching silk pajamas and carry them to their beds, where they would snuggle under custom quilts while she read stories from leather-bound collections of fairy tales. "Tell Daddy story," Rose would request as Diana tucked her in, her sapphire eyes wide with hope that perhaps tonight would be different. "I'll tell Daddy all about your day when he gets home," Diana would promise, knowing that by the time Alexander returned, the girls would be fast asleep, and he would be too exhausted or distracted to ask about their activities. After the twins were settled, Diana would retreat to their master suite, where she would sit in the window seat overlooking their circular driveway, watching for the headlights of Alexander's Maserati. Sometimes he would arrive before midnight, slipping into bed with the careful movements of someone trying not to wake a sleeping spouse. Other nights, she would fall asleep alone in their California king bed, surrounded by the kind of luxury that should have felt like paradise but instead felt increasingly like a beautifully appointed prison. From the outside, the Kanes appeared to have everything that money could buy and love could create. But as Diana would soon discover, appearances could be not just deceiving, they could be deliberately constructed lies designed to hide betrayals so devastating that they would shatter not just her marriage, but her fundamental understanding of the man she had trusted with her heart and her children's future. The first signs that Diana's perfect world was built on quicksand appeared on a crisp October evening when she decided to surprise Alexander at his office with dinner from Lucinda's, the intimate Italian restaurant where they'd had their first date 7 years ago. She had spent the afternoon preparing the twins' favorite activities for their nanny, Rebecca, ensuring that Lily and Rose would be happily occupied with art projects and story time, while she attempted to reconnect with a husband who seemed to be slipping further away with each passing day. Diana arrived at the gleaming 40-story tower that housed Kane and Associates at 7:30 p.m., carrying a picnic basket filled with homemade osso buco, Alexander's favorite wine, and the tiramisu she had learned to make during their honeymoon in Tuscany. The security guard, familiar with her monthly visits during their earlier, happier years, waved her through with a knowing smile. "Mr. Kane's working late again, Mrs. Kane. That man of yours never stops." If only he knew how true that statement was becoming, Diana thought as she rode the elevator to the 32nd floor, watching the city lights blur past through the glass panels. The elevator dinged softly as it reached Alexander's floor, and she stepped into the reception area of Kane and Associates, expecting to find the usual after-hours quiet of a law firm where only the most dedicated attorneys remain to burn the midnight oil. Instead, she heard laughter. Not the professional chuckles that punctuated business meetings, but genuine, intimate laughter that made her stomach clench with a recognition she didn't want to acknowledge. Following the sound down the hallway lined with awards and photographs of Alexander's legal victories, Diana approached his corner office where warm lights spilled beneath the door. Through the slightly open door, she could see Alexander leaning back in his leather executive chair, his tie loosened and his shirt sleeves rolled up in a way that suggested casual comfort rather than professional presentation. Across from him sat a woman Diana had never seen before, her long auburn hair catching the light from his desk lamp as she gestured animatedly while recounting some story that clearly delighted Alexander. The woman appeared to be in her mid-20s, strikingly beautiful in the effortless way that came with youth and confidence. She wore a fitted black dress that managed to be both professional and subtly alluring, and her laugh had a musical quality that seemed to light up Alexander's face in a way Diana hadn't seen in months. More troubling than her beauty was the obvious familiarity between them, the way she leaned forward when making a point, the way Alexander's eyes never left her face, the comfortable silence that fell between them that spoke of many previous conversations. Diana stood frozen in the hallway, the picnic basket suddenly feeling impossibly heavy in her hands. She watched as the woman reached across Alexander's desk to point at something on his computer screen, her fingers brushing his hand in a gesture that lasted a fraction of a second longer than necessary. Alexander's response was immediate, a subtle shift in his posture that brought him closer to her, his voice dropping to that intimate tone Diana remembered from their early courtship. "You're absolutely brilliant, Jasmine," she heard him say, his voice carrying an admiration that made Diana's chest tighten with something between heartbreak and rage. "I don't know how I managed without you all these years." Jasmine. The name struck Diana with unexpected force, though she couldn't immediately place why it felt familiar. She realized with growing horror that she was witnessing something far more dangerous than a simple business relationship. This was intimacy, emotional connection, the kind of bond that couldn't be explained away by professional collaboration. Rather than announce her presence and demand an explanation that would only result in carefully crafted lies, Diana stepped back into the shadows of the reception area, her legal training automatically cataloging details that her heart wanted to ignore. The way Jasmine's coat was draped over the chair suggested she had been there for hours. The empty wine glasses on Alexander's credenza indicated this was far from their first evening meeting. Most damning of all was the ease with which they occupied each other's space, the unconscious choreography of two people who had grown comfortable with boundaries that had nothing to do with attorney and client. Diana left the building without ever announcing her arrival, the untouched dinner growing cold in her basket as she drove home through streets that suddenly felt foreign despite their familiarity. The 30-minute drive back to Pinehurst Estates passed in a blur of racing thoughts and growing dread as pieces of a puzzle she hadn't realized existed began clicking into place with devastating clarity. The late nights that had become routine over the past 6 months. The business trips to cities where Diana's calls went unanswered for hours at a time. The subtle changes in Alexander's behavior when he was home, the way he guarded his phone, the new cologne that masked scents she didn't recognize, the emotional distance that she had attributed to career stress but now understood might have an entirely different explanation. Back at the mansion, Diana paid Rebecca and checked on the twins, who were sleeping peacefully in their beds, blissfully unaware that their mother's world was beginning to crumble around them. Rose had kicked off her covers and lay sprawled across her mattress like a starfish, while Lily clutched her stuffed elephant with a fierce determination that characterized everything she did. Looking at their innocent faces, Diana felt a fierce protective instinct surge through her chest. Whatever was happening between Alexander and this Jasmine, her daughters would be shielded from the fallout. Over the following weeks, Diana began to notice things that should have been obvious months earlier. Alexander's phone, which had once been casually left on kitchen counters and bedside tables, now never left his side. His work schedule, previously predictable despite its demands, had become erratic in ways that didn't align with the patterns Diana knew characterized legal practice. Most tellingly, his emotional availability, already limited, had virtually disappeared. When Diana attempted to engage him in conversations about their plans for the holidays, his responses were distracted, perfunctory. When she suggested they plan a weekend away, just the two of them, he cited caseloads that wouldn't permit time off. When she showed him videos of the twins' latest milestones, Lily's first attempt at writing her name, Rose's newfound ability to count to 20, he watched with the polite attention of someone fulfilling an obligation rather than the genuine delight of a father witnessing his children's growth. The emotional distance was accompanied by physical withdrawal that Diana tried desperately to rationalize. Alexander came to bed later and later, often claiming he needed to review case files that couldn't wait until morning. Their conversations, once ranging from playful banter to serious discussions about their future, had been reduced to logistics about household management and scheduling conflicts. The easy affection that had characterized their early marriage, spontaneous kisses, casual touches, shared jokes that no one else would understand, had vanished so gradually that Diana couldn't pinpoint when it had disappeared. But it was the financial irregularities that finally forced Diana to confront the possibility that her husband was living a double life. Alexander had always managed their personal finances, claiming that his expertise in corporate law made him better suited to handling investments and expenditures. Diana had been content with this arrangement, trusting implicitly in his judgment and preferring to focus her energy on their home and children. Now, reviewing their credit card statements with the analytical mind that had made her a formidable law student, Diana discovered charges that didn't align with Alexander's stated activities. Expensive dinners at restaurants she'd never heard of, billed on evenings when he claimed to be working late at the office. Jewelry purchases from boutiques that specialized in gifts for younger women, items that had never appeared in Diana's possession. Most damning were hotel charges in Manhattan, rooms booked during hours when Alexander should have been home with his family. Each discovery felt like a physical blow, confirming suspicions that Diana had been trying desperately to dismiss as paranoia born from loneliness. But the evidence was mounting with the inexorable weight of mathematical proof, creating a picture of systematic deception that went far beyond simple marital neglect. As November turned to December and Diana began the elaborate preparations for Christmas that had become her annual ritual, she realized that she was no longer simply trying to maintain their family traditions. She was conducting a kind of test, creating opportunities for Alexander to choose his family over whatever parallel life he had constructed. Each invitation to participate in holiday activities became a moment of truth, each excuse for his absence another confirmation that the man she had married was methodically erasing himself from their lives. But Diana Kane was not the same trusting young woman who had walked down the aisle 7 years ago. She was a mother with everything to lose and a brilliant legal mind that was beginning to understand exactly how much power she actually possessed. The question was no longer whether Alexander was betraying their family, it was what she intended to do about it. The revelation of Alexander's double life began to unfold with the systematic precision of a legal case building toward an inevitable verdict. What had started as Diana's growing suspicions crystallized into undeniable evidence during the first week of December, when a single phone call shattered any remaining illusions about her marriage. Diana was in the nursery, helping Lily and Rose sort through their toy collection to donate items they had outgrown, when Alexander's phone rang from their bedroom. He was in the shower, and the persistent ringing suggested an urgent call that couldn't wait. Acting on an impulse that would later seem like divine intervention, Diana walked into their master suite and glanced at the screen. The caller ID read, J. Morrison Personal, with a heart emoji that made Diana's blood run cold. She watched the call go to voicemail, then stared at the phone with the growing realization that this woman, whoever she was, occupied a place in Alexander's life significant enough to warrant her own personalized contact entry. When the phone chimed with a voicemail notification, Diana made a decision that would irrevocably alter the trajectory of her marriage. The voicemail was brief but devastatingly intimate. Alex, darling, I know you're probably getting ready for work, but I couldn't stop thinking about last night. The way you looked at me when we were talking about our future. I've never felt anything like this before. I can't wait to see you tonight. I love you. The voice was young, breathless with emotion, and unmistakably the same woman Diana had seen in Alexander's office weeks earlier. But more than the confirmation of the affair, what struck Diana like a physical blow was the casualness of the woman's assumption that she could call Alexander's personal phone, that she had claimed to his evenings, that they had discussed a future together that apparently didn't include his current family. Diana saved the voicemail and quickly scrolled through Alexander's recent call history, her legal training automatically cataloging evidence that painted a picture of systematic deception. The same number appeared dozens of times over the past 3 months, calls that lasted 40 minutes to an hour, always during times when Alexander claimed to be in meetings or traveling for business. Text message previews showed fragments of conversations that left no doubt about the intimate nature of their relationship. "Can't wait to see you tonight. Thinking about our weekend in the Hamptons. You make me feel alive again." The Hamptons. Diana remembered that weekend in October when Alexander had claimed he was attending a mandatory continuing education seminar in Albany. She had spent those 2 days alone with the twins, managing their usual activities while missing the adult conversation and partnership that had once made even routine days feel manageable. Now she understood that while she was reading bedtime stories and preparing meals for one, her husband was creating romantic memories with another woman in one of the country's most exclusive resort destinations. Moving with the methodical precision that had characterized her approach to complex legal cases, Diana began her own investigation. She accessed their joint credit card accounts online, something she rarely did since Alexander handled their finances, and discovered a financial trail that documented the scope of his betrayal with devastating clarity. Charges at romantic restaurants in Manhattan appeared consistently on evenings when Alexander claimed to be working late. Hotel reservations at boutique properties showed a pattern of weekend getaways that corresponded with his alleged business trips. Most damning were the charges at jewelry stores, high-end boutiques, and luxury retailers that specialized in gifts for young professional women. In the past 6 months alone, Alexander had spent over $30,000 on items that had never appeared in their home. A Cartier bracelet purchased in September. Designer handbags from Hermès and Chanel bought in October. A diamond necklace from Tiffany & Company that cost more than most people's annual salaries, purchased just 3 weeks ago. Each transaction felt like a betrayal not just of their marriage vows, but of the financial partnership Diana had trusted Alexander to manage responsibly. While she carefully budgeted household expenses and made thoughtful decisions about their children's education and activities, her husband was lavishing expensive gifts on his mistress using funds that belonged to their family's future security. Diana's investigation revealed that Jasmine Morrison was 26 years old and worked as a senior marketing coordinator at Brennan & Associates, a consulting firm that frequently collaborated with Alexander's law practice on international acquisitions. According to her LinkedIn profile, she had graduated from Georgetown University with a master's degree in international business and specialized in market analysis for European expansion projects. She was beautiful, accomplished, and young enough to view a successful attorney as an exciting mentor figure rather than the flawed, middle-aged man that Diana had grown to know intimately. But what disturbed Diana most about Jasmine's social media presence wasn't her obvious intelligence and beauty, it was the glimpses of a lifestyle that seemed funded by Alexander's generosity. Photos from expensive restaurants that Diana recognized from their credit card statements. Weekend trips to locations that corresponded with Alexander's business travel schedule. Designer clothing and accessories that matched the mysterious charges Diana had discovered in their financial records. Jasmine was living the life of a successful attorney's girlfriend, enjoying the fruits of Alexander's professional success while Diana managed the responsibilities and mundane realities of his actual life. She attended charity galas and business networking events that Diana should have been accompanying Alexander to, occupying the role of sophisticated companion while Diana stayed home with their children, maintaining the domestic foundation that allowed Alexander's career to flourish. The depth of the deception became even more apparent when Diana discovered that Alexander had established a separate credit card account, one that didn't appear on their joint financial statements. The monthly bills were delivered to his office rather than their home, and the charges revealed a parallel existence that had been carefully hidden from Diana's oversight. This secret account funded not just gifts and romantic dinners, but apartment rental payments for a luxury condo in Tribeca that served as Alexander and Jasmine's private retreat. Diana spent an entire afternoon parked across the street from the Tribeca address, watching the building where her husband apparently maintained a second life. The doorman greeted residents with a kind of deferential attention reserved for wealthy tenants, and the lobby visible through floor-to-ceiling windows suggested the kind of understated luxury that appealed to successful professionals who wanted discretion along with their comfort. At 6:30 p.m., Diana watched Alexander's Maserati pull up to the building's valet parking area. Her husband emerged from the driver's seat looking relaxed and happy in a way she rarely saw at home, carrying a bottle of wine and a bouquet of flowers that he had obviously selected with care. 20 minutes later, Jasmine appeared in the lobby, rushing toward Alexander with a kind of unrestrained joy that Diana remembered from their own early courtship. Watching them embrace through the building's windows, Diana felt something break inside her chest that had nothing to do with heartbreak and everything to do with rage. This wasn't a casual affair or a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a complete alternate life that Alexander had constructed with methodical planning and substantial financial investment. While Diana managed their children's daily needs and maintained the home that served as the foundation for his professional reputation, Alexander was playing house with a younger woman who received all the romance, attention, and emotional availability that should have belonged to his wife. The most devastating realization came when Diana discovered that Alexander had been introducing Jasmine as his girlfriend to business associates who didn't know about his marriage. Email chains from Alexander's professional contacts revealed that several colleagues believed him to be a successful bachelor who had recently begun a serious relationship with an impressive young marketing professional. Client dinner invitations were extended to Alexander and Jasmine, while Diana remained invisible in his professional circle, her existence carefully edited out of his public persona. The man who came home to Pinehurst Estates each night, when he came home at all, was essentially an actor playing the role of husband and father, while his authentic self lived in Tribeca with a woman who believed she was dating an eligible attorney rather than a married father of two. Diana had become a supporting character in her own life, maintaining the domestic infrastructure that enabled Alexander's success while he invested his emotional and financial resources in a relationship that promised him excitement rather than responsibility. As December progressed and Diana's investigation revealed the full scope of Alexander's betrayal, she realized that her marriage hadn't simply deteriorated. It had been systematically dismantled by a husband who had decided that his family was an obstacle to the life he really wanted. The loving father and devoted husband she remembered from their early years hadn't gradually changed. He had been deliberately replaced by someone who viewed his domestic obligations as a burden to be minimized rather than a blessing to be cherished. But Alexander had made a critical error in his careful compartmentalization of his two lives. He had underestimated the woman he married, failing to recognize that Diana's decision to prioritize their family over her legal career hadn't diminished her intellectual capabilities or her capacity for strategic thinking. The devoted wife and mother he took for granted was about to remind him that underestimating your opponent was the first mistake that led to devastating defeat. Diana's transformation from trusting wife to strategic investigator accelerated with the methodical precision that had once made her one of Columbia Law's most promising students. Armed with irrefutable evidence of Alexander's betrayal, she began building a case that would have impressed the most demanding prosecutor, documenting every lie, every financial irregularity, and every moment of neglect with a thoroughness that characterized her approach to complex legal problems. Her first step was establishing a secure digital environment where she could compile evidence without risking discovery. Using her maiden name, Diana opened a new email account and cloud storage system, then purchased a laptop that Alexander would never encounter. Every evening after the twins were asleep and Alexander was presumably with Jasmine in their Tribeca sanctuary, Diana worked like the brilliant attorney she had been, transforming scattered suspicions into an airtight case of marital fraud. She began with financial documentation, methodically printing bank statements, credit card bills, and investment records that Alexander believed were safely hidden from her scrutiny. The pattern that emerged was staggering in its scope and brazenness. Over the past 8 months, Alexander had diverted nearly $200,000 from their joint accounts and investment portfolios to fund his relationship with Jasmine. The luxury apartment rental alone cost $8,000 per month, while the gifts, travel, and entertainment expenses suggested a level of financial commitment that exceeded what most couples spent in their first year of marriage. But Diana's legal training taught her that financial evidence, while compelling, was only part of a comprehensive case. She needed to document the emotional abandonment that had preceded and accompanied the affair, creating a timeline that would demonstrate Alexander's systematic withdrawal from their family life. Using her phone's recording capabilities, she began documenting the twins' daily questions about their absent father, creating an audio diary that captured the confusion and sadness in their young voices when Alexander missed bedtime stories, skipped weekend activities, or failed to appear for meals he had promised to share. "Daddy coming home tonight?" Rose asked during one recorded dinner conversation, her 3-year-old voice bright with hope despite weeks of disappointed expectations. "I don't know, sweetheart," Diana replied, her own voice carefully controlled as she cut their chicken into small pieces. "Daddy has very important work to do." "More important than us?" Lily asked with the devastating logic that children possessed, her question cutting straight to the heart of Alexander's twisted priorities. Diana's answer was honest in its ambiguity. "Daddy thinks his work is very important right now." These recordings would later serve as powerful evidence of the emotional damage Alexander's choices were inflicting on their children, but in the moment, they helped Diana understand that her investigation wasn't just about gathering evidence. It was about protecting Lily and Rose from the psychological trauma of watching their father systematically abandon them. Her surveillance of Alexander's activities expanded beyond simple financial tracking to include comprehensive documentation of his movements and communications. Diana discovered that Alexander's phone was backed up to their shared family cloud account, a security feature he had installed years earlier when they trusted each other completely. This oversight gave her access to every text message, email, and photo that Alexander believed was private, creating a real-time window into his relationship with Jasmine that was both invaluable and heartbreaking. The text exchanges between Alexander and his mistress revealed a level of emotional intimacy that made Diana's chest ache with loss. Alexander wrote to Jasmine with a romantic eloquence that Diana remembered from their own early courtship, describing his feelings with a passion that had been absent from their marriage for months. "You've awakened something in me that I thought was dead," he wrote in one message. "Being with you reminds me who I really am beneath all the responsibilities and obligations." Responsibilities and obligations. That was how Alexander now characterized their marriage and children, burdens that prevented him from accessing his authentic self rather than the foundation that should have given his life meaning and purpose. Diana realized that she wasn't just competing with another woman, she was competing with Alexander's fantasy of a life unburdened by the complexities of actual commitment. The photos Alexander shared with Jasmine were particularly devastating. Images from their romantic dinners showed Alexander laughing with genuine joy, his face relaxed and animated in ways that Diana rarely witnessed at home. Weekend getaway pictures captured him looking younger and more carefree than he had appeared in years, while Diana managed their household alone and crafted excuses for his absence that protected their children from the truth about their father's priorities. But it was Alexander's communications about their future that transformed Diana's heartbreak into something far more dangerous: cold, calculated fury. In message after message, Alexander discussed his plans to leave his family with the casual tone of someone planning a career change rather than destroying the lives of people who loved him. "Once the divorce is finalized, we can finally be together properly," he wrote to Jasmine. "I'm thinking we should look at houses in Connecticut, something with enough space for entertaining but more modern than what I have now." More modern than what I have now. Alexander was already mentally replacing their family home, the place where Diana had created a life centered around their children's needs and happiness, with something that would better suit his relationship with his mistress. The casual way he dismissed years of shared memories and careful domestic creation revealed how completely he had detached from the life they had built together. Diana's investigation also uncovered evidence that Alexander was actively undermining their marriage while maintaining the facade of a committed husband. Email exchanges with his attorney revealed that Alexander had already begun preliminary divorce planning, consulting about asset protection and custody arrangements that would minimize his financial obligations while ensuring maximum access to their joint resources. He was preparing to abandon his family while positioning himself to emerge from the divorce with his wealth and reputation intact. Most damaging were Alexander's communications with business associates, where he portrayed Diana as an increasingly unstable wife who was struggling to adjust to the demands of motherhood. These strategic character assassinations were clearly designed to establish grounds for favorable custody arrangements when Alexander finally decided to formalize his departure from their marriage. He described Diana as emotionally volatile and overly dependent, creating a narrative that would justify his eventual abandonment while protecting his professional reputation. The psychological manipulation was systematic and sophisticated, demonstrating that Alexander hadn't simply fallen into an affair. He had orchestrated a careful exit strategy that would allow him to walk away from his family with minimal consequences. Diana realized that while she had been trying to save their marriage through patience and understanding, Alexander had been methodically destroying it while ensuring that she would bear the blame for its failure. But Alexander's greatest mistake was underestimating the woman he had married. Diana's legal education had taught her that the most successful cases were built on comprehensive preparation and strategic thinking, skills that applied as effectively to personal crises as they did to professional challenges. Every piece of evidence she gathered, every recorded conversation, and every financial irregularity she documented was building towards something Alexander couldn't imagine: his wife's complete and total victory. The turning point came when Diana discovered Alexander's most recent communication with Jasmine, a series of messages that revealed his timeline for leaving their family. "I'm thinking we should plan for a New Year's fresh start," Alexander had written. "I'll tell Diana after Christmas that I need space to figure things out, then move into the Tribeca place permanently. The twins are young enough that they'll adjust quickly, and Diana will eventually realize that this is better for everyone." Reading those words, Diana felt the last vestiges of her old self, the trusting wife who had believed in their partnership, the devoted mother who had prioritized family harmony above her own needs, the woman who had sacrificed her career to support Alexander's ambitions, finally disappear completely. In their place emerged someone Alexander had never met, a brilliant strategist with unlimited resources, unshakable determination, and absolutely nothing left to lose. Alexander thought he was planning to abandon his family after Christmas. What he didn't realize was that Diana was planning something far more devastating: his complete and total destruction. The question wasn't whether she would destroy the man who had systematically betrayed their family, it was how thoroughly she would dismantle the life he thought he could simply walk away from. It took a lot of care and time to prepare and narrate this for you, so if you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe really helps and means the world to us. Alright, let's get back to it. The breaking point arrived on December 22nd, crystallizing into a moment of such profound betrayal that it shattered any remaining fragments of Diana's capacity for hope or forgiveness. The day had begun with a kind of domestic harmony that Alexander's absence had made increasingly rare: Lily and Rose waking up excited about their planned visit to see the Christmas lights at Rockefeller Center, their faces bright with the anticipation that made even routine activities feel magical when shared with people you loved. Diana had spent the morning preparing for what she hoped might be a family outing that could remind Alexander of what he was systematically destroying. She dressed the twins in matching red velvet coats with white fur trim, their golden curls carefully arranged with ribbons that coordinated with their outfits. They looked like something from a Christmas card, beautiful and innocent, and completely trusting that their parents would create the kind of magical holiday memories that would sustain them through whatever challenges life might bring. At 2 p.m., Diana called Alexander's office to confirm their meeting time, only to be told by his secretary that Mr. Kane had left early for a family emergency and wouldn't be returning that day. The casual way his assistant delivered this information suggested that Alexander's early departures had become routine enough to warrant standard explanations rather than genuine concern. Diana felt her stomach clench with familiar dread, but she forced herself to remain calm as she asked for clarification. "Did he mention what kind of family emergency?" Diana asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "No, Mrs. Kane, he just said it was urgent and that he needed to handle it personally." He seemed quite concerned. Diana thanked the secretary and hung up, staring at her phone while the twins played nearby, completely unaware that their father had once again chosen to spend time with his mistress rather than fulfill a commitment to his daughters. But what transformed disappointment into rage was the text message that arrived on Alexander's phone 20 minutes later, a message that Diana intercepted thanks to the cloud backup system that continued to document his betrayal in real time. The message was from Jasmine: "Thank you for leaving work early to help me pick out the perfect dress for tonight's Christmas party. I still can't believe you convinced the partners to let you bring me as your date to the firm's holiday celebration. It feels like we're finally becoming a real couple instead of hiding what we have. I love you so much, Alex." Diana read the message 3 times before its full implications registered. Alexander hadn't just abandoned their family outing to spend time with his mistress. He was taking Jasmine to his law firm's annual Christmas party, an event that Diana had attended with him for the past 7 years as his wife and partner. The same party where they had danced to their wedding song just 2 years ago, where Alexander had introduced Diana to important clients as the brilliant woman who had sacrificed her own legal career to support his success, where they had laughed together at inside jokes that no one else understood. Now Jasmine would occupy that role, standing beside Alexander as he received congratulations on another successful year, meeting the people who comprised his professional world, experiencing the kind of public acknowledgement that Diana had been systematically erased from receiving. While Diana stayed home with their children, crafting explanations for Daddy's absence that protected them from the truth about his priorities, Alexander would be introducing his mistress to colleagues as though she were the legitimate partner in his life. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating in its casual cruelty, that Diana felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. The woman who had spent months making excuses for Alexander's behavior, who had convinced herself that his distance was temporary stress, who had believed that patience and understanding could heal any wound, that woman ceased to exist in that moment. Diana called Rebecca, their nanny, and asked her to stay late so she could handle an urgent matter. Then she dressed carefully in the black Armani dress that Alexander had always said made her look like a movie star, applied makeup with the precision of someone preparing for battle, and drove to the St. Regis Hotel, where Kane and Associates held their annual Christmas celebration. The hotel's ballroom was decorated with a kind of understated elegance that appealed to Manhattan's legal elite: crystal chandeliers, fresh floral arrangements, and enough expensive wine to ensure that conversations flowed freely among attorneys who typically guarded their words with professional caution. Diana arrived at 7:30 p.m. and positioned herself where she could observe the party without being immediately noticed, watching the door for Alexander's arrival while cataloging the faces of colleagues who had once been friends. Alexander appeared at 8 p.m., looking handsome and relaxed in his custom tuxedo, his arm around a woman who was everything Diana wasn't anymore: young, carefree, and completely unencumbered by the responsibilities of motherhood or the knowledge of what sustained commitment actually required. Jasmine wore a stunning emerald dress that perfectly complemented her auburn hair and cost more than most people spent on rent, her face glowing with the kind of happiness that came from believing you were loved by someone worth having. Diana watched from across the room as Alexander introduced Jasmine to senior partners, clients, and colleagues with obvious pride, his hand resting possessively on her back as he guided her through conversations with people who had once considered Diana a friend. The easy intimacy between them was apparent to anyone who cared to notice: the way Jasmine's fingers lingered on Alexander's arm when she laughed, the way he leaned close to whisper comments that made her eyes sparkle with amusement, the way they moved together with the unconscious coordination of people who had grown comfortable in each other's space. But what shattered Diana's remaining composure was overhearing Alexander's conversation with Marcus Brennan, the senior partner whose approval Alexander had sought throughout his career. "She's remarkable," Alexander was saying about Jasmine, his voice carrying the same tone of genuine admiration that Diana remembered from their early courtship. "Brilliant, accomplished, and she understands the demands of this profession in a way that makes everything easier." "It's wonderful to see you so happy," Brennan replied warmly. "You seem like a completely different person than you were a few years ago. Much more yourself. More yourself." As if the devoted husband and father Diana had known was some kind of performance that prevented Alexander from accessing his authentic personality. As if the responsibilities of marriage and parenthood had been burdens that suppressed his true nature rather than opportunities to demonstrate the kind of character that actually mattered. Diana realized that she wasn't just witnessing Alexander's betrayal, she was watching him erase their entire history together, replacing their shared past with a narrative that positioned Jasmine as the woman who had finally allowed him to become the person he was meant to be. Their marriage, their children, the life they had built together, all of it was being rewritten as obstacles that had prevented Alexander from achieving the happiness he deserved. Standing in that ballroom, surrounded by people who had once celebrated her marriage to Alexander, Diana felt the last vestiges of her old identity dissolve completely. The woman who had prioritized family harmony over personal fulfillment, who had sacrificed professional ambition for domestic stability, who had believed that love and commitment were mutual contracts rather than one-sided offerings, That woman had been systematically destroyed by a husband who viewed her devotion as weakness rather than strength. In her place emerged someone Alexander had never encountered, a strategist who understood that the most devastating victories came not from emotional confrontation but from methodical preparation and precise execution. Someone who recognized that Alexander's greatest vulnerability wasn't his affair, but his assumption that Diana would continue to absorb his betrayals without consequence. Someone who possessed the intelligence, resources, and motivation to destroy not just Alexander's marriage but the entire life he had built on the foundation of other people's sacrifices. Diana left the party without announcing her presence, driving home through streets that sparkled with Christmas lights while formulating plans that would make Alexander's current betrayal seem trivial compared to what was coming. She had given him 7 years of her life, 2 beautiful daughters, and the kind of unwavering support that enabled his professional success. In return, he had systematically replaced her with a younger woman while planning to abandon his family with minimal consequences. But Alexander had made one critical miscalculation in his careful orchestration of his exit strategy. He had assumed that Diana's love for their children would make her willing to accept any terms he offered rather than risk a custody battle that might traumatize Lily and Rose. He had counted on her devotion to family stability to ensure that she would prioritize their daughter's immediate comfort over long-term justice. What Alexander didn't understand was that protecting her children meant more than preserving the illusion of family unity. It meant ensuring that Lily and Rose grew up knowing they were worth more than being someone's afterthought, that they deserved relationships built on genuine commitment rather than convenient obligations. And most importantly, it meant teaching them through her own example that women who were smart enough, strong enough, and determined enough could create their own justice when the world failed to provide it. The devoted wife and mother Alexander thought he could discard was about to become his most formidable opponent. And unlike the legal adversaries he faced in courtrooms, Diana had something that made her infinitely more dangerous: intimate knowledge of every weakness, every fear, and every vulnerability that Alexander had revealed during 7 years of marriage. She knew exactly how to destroy him, and she had every intention of using that knowledge to create consequences he had never imagined possible. The phone call that would reshape Diana's understanding of power arrived at 11:47 p.m. on December 23rd, just as she finished wrapping the last of the Christmas presents that Alexander would never see his daughters open. She had been moving through the motions of holiday preparation with mechanical precision, her mind occupied with logistics that had nothing to do with Santa Claus or family traditions and everything to do with the systematic destruction of her husband's carefully constructed double life. The caller ID showed a number Diana didn't recognize, but the voice on the other end carried the kind of authority that commanded immediate attention. "Mrs. Kane, this is Charlotte Whitfield from Whitfield, Sterling and Associates in Boston. I've been trying to reach you for several months regarding your late aunt's estate." Diana paused in her wrapping, surrounded by ribbons and paper that suddenly seemed to belong to someone else's life. "I'm sorry, I think you have the wrong number. I don't have any aunts who would have left me anything." "Your mother's sister, Catherine Morrison Blackwell," Charlotte continued with professional patience. "She passed away 14 months ago in Switzerland. I understand there may have been family complications that prevented earlier contact, but Mrs. Blackwell was very specific about ensuring you received your inheritance regardless of any previous estrangements." The name hit Diana like a physical blow. Catherine Morrison Blackwell, the aunt who had disappeared from their family when Diana was 8 years old after a bitter falling out with Diana's parents that had never been fully explained. The aunt whose Christmas cards had stopped coming, whose birthday calls had ceased, whose very existence had become a forbidden topic in the Morrison household after some unspecified family scandal. "That's impossible," Diana whispered, sinking onto the sofa surrounded by Christmas wrapping. "We lost touch years ago. My parents never spoke about her after I was a child." "Ms. Kane, your aunt spent the last 15 years of her life trying to reconnect with your family. When your parents passed away in that car accident 5 years ago, Mrs. Blackwell was devastated to learn she had missed the opportunity for reconciliation. She hired investigators to locate you and has been monitoring your life from a distance, waiting for the right moment to establish contact." Diana's parents had died when the twins were 18 months old, their deaths in a winter storm leaving Diana feeling completely alone in the world except for the husband who was now systematically destroying their family. The grief had been overwhelming, compounded by the isolation of new motherhood and Alexander's increasing emotional unavailability. The idea that she had family who cared about her welfare, even from a distance, was almost too overwhelming to process. "I don't understand," Diana said, her voice barely audible. "Why didn't she contact me directly if she wanted a relationship?" She wanted to respect your parents' wishes regarding family contact, even though she disagreed with their decision. However, Mrs. Blackwell was a very practical woman who believed in preparing for contingencies. She made provisions in her will that would activate if you ever found yourself in circumstances where family support became essential. The words seemed to hang in the air like smoke. What kind of circumstances? Mrs. Blackwell was a successful international investment banker who built considerable wealth over 40 years of strategic financial planning. When she passed away, her estate was valued at approximately $52 million. But more importantly for your current situation, she was aware of your husband's professional activities and recent personal choices. Diana's blood turned to ice. What do you mean? Your aunt maintained connections in Manhattan's legal community through her business dealings. She knew about Mr. Kane's relationship with Jasmine Morrison, his financial deceptions, and his plans for your marriage. She was particularly concerned about your welfare and that of your daughters. The room seemed to tilt around Diana. Catherine had known about Alexander's affair, about his plans to abandon their family, about the careful way he had been manipulating their financial resources to fund his relationship with his mistress. While Diana had been gathering evidence and planning her own response to Alexander's betrayal, her aunt had been preparing resources that would give her options she never imagined possible. Mrs. Blackwell left very specific instructions, Charlotte continued gently. The inheritance is yours unconditionally, but she also established comprehensive support systems specifically designed to help women in your situation. Legal representation, financial protection, secure housing arrangements, and educational trusts for your daughters that will ensure their security regardless of what happens with your marriage. Diana found herself laughing, a sound that bordered on hysteria. Here she had been, planning to fight Alexander with whatever resources she could access, trying to figure out how to protect her daughters while building a new life as a single mother. Her aunt, a woman she barely remembered, had been watching over her for years, preparing for exactly this moment. "There's more," Charlotte said. Mrs. Blackwell anticipated that timing would be crucial in a situation like yours. She arranged for everything to be handled with complete discretion. The estate has already cleared probate under sealed records, the financial transfers can be completed within hours, and there are safe houses available in multiple locations if you need to relocate quickly. Diana thought about Alexander, probably at this very moment lying beside Jasmine in their Tribeca apartment, planning his New Year's announcement about needing space to figure things out. He had no idea that while he was orchestrating what he believed would be his smooth exit from family responsibilities, his wife had just inherited the means to disappear completely with their daughters. "What would I need to do?" Diana asked, her practical mind beginning to function despite the shock. "Pack whatever you and the children need for an extended stay away from your current home. My firm has properties available in Colorado, California, and internationally if you prefer. All expenses will be covered, all arrangements have been made. You and your daughters could be completely safe and financially secure by tomorrow evening." The twins. Diana looked toward the staircase, thinking about Lily and Rose sleeping peacefully in their beds, trusting that Mommy would keep them safe and loved. They deserved better than a father who saw them as obstacles to his happiness with a younger woman. "What about custody issues?" Diana asked, her legal training asserting itself despite the emotional chaos. "If I take the girls out of state without Alexander's permission?" Mrs. Blackwell anticipated that concern as well. "She established a legal defense fund specifically for custody protection, and my firm specializes in international family law. We have an excellent track record of ensuring that children remain with the parent who prioritizes their well-being over personal convenience." Charlotte paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a warmth that suggested this conversation was more than simply professional obligation. Mrs. Kane, your aunt loved you deeply, even though circumstances prevented her from expressing that love directly. This inheritance isn't just about money, it's about ensuring that you have choices your mother never had, the freedom to protect your children without having to depend on someone who doesn't value what he has. Diana wiped tears from her cheeks, understanding that she was being offered something more precious than money, the power to rewrite the ending of a story that Alexander believed he controlled. For months, she had been reacting to his choices, adapting to his deceptions, trying to salvage something from the wreckage of his betrayal. Now she had the resources to take control of the narrative completely. "There's one more thing," Charlotte added. Mrs. Blackwell was very specific about the psychological impact of financial abuse and systematic deception. She arranged for comprehensive therapy services for both you and your daughters, recognizing that healing from this kind of betrayal requires professional support along with financial security. Financial abuse. The term perfectly described what Alexander had been doing, using his control of their finances to fund his affair while keeping Diana financially dependent and uninformed about their true assets. He had weaponized money to ensure his freedom while limiting her options, never imagining that his wife might gain access to resources that would make his financial manipulations irrelevant. "Mrs. Kane," Charlotte said gently, "what would you like me to arrange? We have a private jet standing by at Westchester Airport that can take you anywhere you choose to go. We can have a car at your house within 2 hours." Diana looked around their living room one final time, at the Christmas tree that sparkled with ornaments collected over 7 years of marriage, at the family photos that documented happier times when she believed Alexander's love was genuine, at the wrapped presents that would never be opened by the family she had thought they were. "Tell them to be there at 4 a.m., Diana said, her voice steady for the first time in months. "We'll be ready." By the time she hung up the phone, Diana Kane was no longer the abandoned wife waiting for her husband to remember he had a family. She was a woman with $52 million, a team of international lawyers, and the means to ensure her daughters grew up knowing they were worth more than being someone's inconvenient obligation. Outside, Christmas Eve was ending in Pinehurst Estates, where neighbors slept peacefully in homes that looked perfect from the outside. Inside the Kane mansion, Christmas morning was about to begin somewhere else entirely, in a place where it would mean safety and love and the kind of future where little girls never had to wonder why Daddy chose someone else over their family. Alexander thought he was planning to abandon his family after Christmas. What he didn't realize was that by the time he woke up on Christmas morning, his family would be gone, not because they had been abandoned, but because they had finally gained the power to abandon him. The next 4 hours unfolded with the surreal precision of an escape plan that Diana had never imagined she would need, but which felt like destiny finally asserting itself over the chaos Alexander had created. At midnight, she stood in the twins' nursery, watching Lily and Rose sleep in their matching beds, their faces peaceful in the soft glow of the nightlight that projected stars across the ceiling they would never see again. Moving with practiced silence honed by years of managing sleeping toddlers, Diana began gathering the essentials that would accompany them into their new life. Favorite blankets that still smelled like home, the stuffed animals without which bedtime was impossible, enough clothing for a week in whatever climate Charlotte had arranged for them. Everything else, the elaborate nursery furniture, the expensive toys, the carefully curated children's library filled with books in multiple languages, could be replaced with money that was now hers to spend as she chose. In her own bedroom, Diana packed with the efficiency of someone who understood that sentiment was a luxury she couldn't afford. A few changes of clothes, her jewelry including pieces that had been gifts from Alexander back when he still believed their marriage was worth investing in, and the important documents she had been gathering over the past weeks of investigation. She paused over her wedding dress, still hanging in the preservation bag where it had waited 7 years for a renewal ceremony that would never come, and felt nothing but relief that she would never have to look at it again. The most difficult task was composing the letter that would serve as Alexander's introduction to the new reality of his life. Diana sat at the antique writing desk where she had addressed birth announcements when the twins were born, where she had written thank-you notes for anniversary gifts that now seemed like artifacts from someone else's marriage, where she had maintained the careful correspondence required of a successful attorney's wife who understood that her husband's reputation depended partly on her social grace. "Alexander," she began, her handwriting steady despite the magnitude of what she was doing, "by the time you read this, the girls and I will be gone. I know about Jasmine. I know about the Tribeca apartment. I know about your plans to leave us after New Year's. I know about all of it, and I have documented every lie, every financial deception, and every moment you chose her over your daughters. Diana paused, considering everything she could say about the loneliness, the humiliation, the gradual erosion of trust that had transformed their marriage into an elaborate performance. But the man who had taken his mistress to his firm's Christmas party, while his daughters waited at home for Daddy to read them bedtime stories, didn't deserve her pain or her explanations. I won't be filing for divorce immediately, she continued, each word chosen with legal precision. I'll be taking time to ensure Lily and Rose are settled and emotionally stable before we address the legal dissolution of our marriage. When we do, you'll discover that I'm not the powerless, financially dependent wife you believed you married. I have resources now that you never knew existed, and I will use them to protect our daughters from the chaos you've created. She sealed the letter and placed it on Alexander's pillow, where he would find it when he eventually returned from whatever romantic evening he was sharing with Jasmine while his family prepared to vanish from his life. By then, they would be thousands of miles away, beginning a new chapter where Christmas meant security and love instead of abandonment and lies. At 3:45 a.m., Diana heard the quiet purr of an expensive engine in their circular driveway. No headlights, as Charlotte had promised, just a sleek black sedan that looked like any other luxury vehicle common to their neighborhood. The driver who emerged was a woman in her 40s with efficient movements and kind eyes that suggested experience with situations that required both discretion and urgency. "Mrs. Kane?" she asked quietly. "I'm Sarah Mitchell. I'll be taking you to the airport." Diana nodded, appreciating the woman's professional calm as they began transferring luggage to the sedan. "The girls are still sleeping. I'm hoping they'll stay that way during the transfer." "Children handle transitions better when they're not fully aware of the stress involved," Sarah replied, helping Diana carry the twins' bags. "They'll wake up somewhere new, but with their mother, and that's what will matter most to them." Lily stirred slightly as Diana lifted her from her bed, making the soft murmuring sounds that indicated she was dreaming rather than waking. Rose remained completely limp with the profound sleep that only young children achieved, her blonde curls tangled from rolling around in her bed. As Diana carried her daughters to the car, she whispered promises they couldn't hear about the better life that waited for them in places where fathers didn't disappear when their families needed them most. The car seats that Sarah had installed were identical to the ones in Diana's Range Rover, ensuring that the twins would wake up in familiar comfort despite the dramatic change in their circumstances. As they drove through the empty streets of Pinehurst Estates, Diana looked back at their mansion one final time, watching the Christmas lights that still twinkled in their front windows fade into the darkness behind them. The house looked perfect from the outside, like a home where a happy family lived, where Christmas morning would bring joy and laughter and the kind of memories that sustained people through difficult times. But appearances, as Diana had learned too painfully, could be devastatingly deceptive. The perfect facade had hidden systematic betrayal, emotional abandonment, and financial manipulation that had nearly destroyed her ability to trust her own perceptions. The drive to Westchester Airport took 35 minutes through roads that had been cleared despite the late hour and light snow that had begun to fall. The private aviation terminal was unmarked and discreet, the kind of facility that wealthy people used when they needed to travel without attracting attention or answering questions about their movements. Charlotte Whitfield was waiting in the terminal's elegant lounge, a tall woman with silver hair and the kind of presence that suggested she was accustomed to managing crises that required both legal expertise and emotional sensitivity. "Diana," Charlotte said, embracing her like family despite their having never met. "Your aunt would be so proud. She always said you had more strength than you realized, and tonight you're proving her right." The private jet was larger than Diana had expected, configured more like a luxury living room than an aircraft, with plush seating that could be converted to beds and enough space for the twins to move around safely when they woke. Charlotte had arranged for a selection of toys, books, and snacks that would help Lily and Rose adjust to their unexpected adventure, transforming what could have been a traumatic experience into something that felt more like an exciting trip. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Diana's phone buzzed with a text from Alexander, running later than expected. "Probably won't make it home until morning. Sleep well. Love you. The casual lies, the assumption that Diana would accept whatever story he offered, the complete disconnection from the reality that his wife and daughters were no longer waiting for him to remember they existed, all of it crystallized into a final understanding of how thoroughly Alexander had devalued their family. She turned off the phone and handed it to Charlotte, who slipped it into a bag that would be destroyed once they reached their destination. From this moment forward, Alexander's attempts to contact them would go through Charlotte's office, filtered through lawyers who understood that some bridges, once burned, could never be rebuilt. Diana had spent years being available to her husband whenever he deigned to acknowledge their existence. Those days were finished forever. The plane lifted off as Christmas morning officially began, carrying them west toward Colorado and a house that Charlotte had described as perfect for families starting over. Below them, Westchester County disappeared into darkness, taking with it the life Diana had built on the foundation of trust and commitment that Alexander had systematically betrayed. Ahead lay mountains, fresh snow, and a future where little girls would never have to compete with their father's selfishness for attention and love. As the twins slept peacefully in seats that had been designed for their comfort and safety, Diana looked out at the stars visible through the aircraft windows and felt something she had almost forgotten existed: hope. Her Aunt Catherine, a woman she barely remembered, had given her granddaughters the gift of complete freedom from a man who had never deserved their love in the first place. For the first time in months, Diana smiled with genuine happiness, understanding that while Alexander thought he was planning to abandon his family, they had instead abandoned him, not in desperation or defeat, but from a position of strength and unlimited possibility. Christmas morning would find them in a place where the holiday would mean exactly what it was supposed to mean: the celebration of new beginnings, unexpected gifts, and the kind of love that didn't come with conditions or expiration dates. Alexander Kane's Christmas morning began with the kind of leisurely satisfaction that comes from believing you've successfully orchestrated a complex deception. He woke at 10:30 a.m. in the king-size bed of the Tribeca apartment, morning sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a spectacular view of the Hudson River. Jasmine was still asleep beside him, her auburn hair spread across the silk pillowcase, looking peaceful and beautiful in a way that reminded him why he had fallen so completely under her spell. For 8 months, he had managed this double life with increasing confidence, convinced that his careful compartmentalization would allow him to have everything he wanted: the stability and professional reputation that came with being a family man, combined with the passion and excitement of his relationship with Jasmine. The fact that this arrangement was unsustainable had seemed like a problem for future Alexander to solve, and Christmas morning felt like the perfect time to begin making that future a reality. "Good morning, beautiful," he murmured as Jasmine stirred, pressing a kiss to her shoulder that still carried the scent of the expensive perfume he had given her for Christmas. She turned to face him with a kind of sleepy smile that made his chest tighten with what he had convinced himself was love. "Merry Christmas," she whispered, reaching for the champagne they had left chilling beside the bed the night before. "To our first Christmas as a real couple instead of whatever we were pretending to be before." Alexander accepted the glass, trying to ignore the small voice in his head that reminded him it was also his daughter's 4th Christmas, and they were probably awake right now looking for presents under a tree he had helped Diana select before he stopped caring about family traditions. "Actually," Jasmine said, sitting up with excitement that made her look even younger than her 26 years, "I have something for you." She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a manila envelope, her eyes bright with anticipation. "I've been working on this for weeks. I wanted it to be perfect." Alexander opened the envelope and found apartment listings for luxury condos in Soho and the Upper East Side. Each listing was annotated in Jasmine's neat handwriting with notes about proximity to his office, entertaining space, and comments like, "perfect for our new life together." The apartments were stunning, expensive, and exactly the kind of modern spaces that appealed to successful professionals who wanted sophistication without the burden of maintaining historic properties. "I know we've talked about you leaving Diana after New Year's," Jasmine said, her voice bubbling with excitement, "and I found the perfect place for us. 3 bedrooms, home office space, amazing views. I already put down a deposit using the credit card you gave me." The apartment listings represented everything Alexander had fantasized about: A life with someone who understood his ambitions, who didn't burden him with discussions about parent-teacher conferences or remind him to read bedtime stories to children who would rather play than listen. But seeing his escape plan documented so thoroughly in Jasmine's handwriting suddenly made everything feel terrifyingly concrete. "This is incredible," he managed, though his voice sounded strange even to himself. "But the timing is still complicated. Diana isn't going to make this easy, and there are custody considerations that could drag on for months." Jasmine's expression shifted slightly, revealing the first hint of impatience he had ever seen from her. "Alexander, we've been together for 8 months. I've been patient while you figured out how to handle your domestic situation, but I can't keep being the other woman forever. I have a career and a reputation to consider." She was right, of course. Jasmine had been remarkably understanding about the complexities of his marriage, never demanding more time than he could give, never pressuring him to make promises he wasn't ready to keep. But her patience clearly had limits, and he was approaching them rapidly. "I know," he said, pulling her closer. "You're absolutely right. It's time to stop living in limbo." They spent the morning in bed, ordering room service and watching Christmas movies on the large television that dominated one wall of their bedroom. It felt decadent and romantic, exactly the kind of Christmas morning Alexander had fantasized about during those endless family obligations that had defined his holidays for the past 4 years. But by afternoon, a familiar sense of guilt began creeping around the edges of his contentment. His phone showed 12 missed calls from his mother in California, probably wondering why he hadn't answered when she called to talk to the twins on Christmas morning. There were also several text messages from business associates wishing him happy holidays and asking about family gatherings that he was supposed to be attending. "I should probably check in at home," he told Jasmine around 3 p.m., reaching for his phone. "Make sure everything's okay with the girls." The call went straight to voicemail, which wasn't unusual when Diana was managing the twins' Christmas activities. He tried the house landline and got the same result. "They're probably at Diana's sister's house," he told himself, though something about the silence felt different from Diana's usual patterns. When he called the neighbors, Margaret Whitmore answered with a tone he had never heard from her before, cold, clipped, almost hostile. "Hello, Alexander." "Margaret. Hey, Merry Christmas. I was trying to reach Diana and the girls. Have you seen them today?" A pause that stretched too long. "No, Alexander, I haven't seen them. But I think you should go home. I think there are some things you need to see." The line went dead, leaving Alexander staring at his phone with the first real stirring of unease he had felt all day. Margaret had always been cordial to him, professionally friendly during neighborhood gatherings. The ice in her voice was completely unlike her usual warmth. "Everything okay?" Jasmine asked, looking up from the fashion magazine she had been reading. "I'm not sure," Alexander admitted. "I think I need to drive out to the house." The drive from Tribeca to Pinehurst Estates took 50 minutes in light Christmas Day traffic. With each mile, Alexander's unease grew stronger. He tried calling the house again, tried Diana's cell phone, even tried calling other neighbors who might have seen his family. Every attempt went unanswered, creating a silence that felt increasingly ominous. Alexander pulled into his circular driveway at 4:45 p.m., Christmas Day nearly over. The house looked exactly as he had left it, decorated for the holidays, peaceful, expensive. But something felt wrong in a way he couldn't articulate. His key worked normally in the front door, and the alarm system showed it had been disarmed, which meant someone had been home recently. But the house felt different, too quiet, too still, as if it had been holding its breath. "Diana," he called, his voice echoing through the marble foyer. "Girls, Daddy's home." Silence. Alexander took the stairs 2 at a time, heading for the twins' nursery. The door was open, revealing empty beds with rumpled bedding, as if someone had left in a hurry. Toys were scattered on the floor, but not in the chaotic way they usually were after Lily and Rose had been playing. This looked more like things had been gathered quickly, with some items left behind. In his bedroom, Alexander found the letter that would shatter his understanding of everything he thought he controlled. Diana's handwriting was neat and precise, each word carefully chosen for maximum impact. As he read, the comfortable world he had constructed over the past 8 months crumbled with devastating efficiency. She knew about Jasmine, about the apartment, about his plans to leave after New Year's, about everything. And she was gone. Alexander sank onto the bed, the letter trembling in his hands. This wasn't supposed to happen. Diana was supposed to be the understanding wife who would eventually accept a quiet divorce, who would prioritize the children's stability over her own hurt feelings. She was supposed to be predictable, manageable, grateful for whatever settlement he offered. The woman who had written this letter was someone else entirely, someone with resources he had never known existed, someone who had been planning while he believed he was in control, someone who possessed the intelligence and determination to outmaneuver him completely. He called her phone again, desperate now. The number was disconnected. Her email bounced back as undeliverable. It was as if Diana Kane had simply ceased to exist, taking his daughters with her into some parallel universe where his actions had consequences he had never bothered to consider. By evening, panic had set in completely. Alexander called the police, but they informed him that wives taking their children for extended visits during holidays wasn't unusual, especially when marriages were troubled. Unless he could prove kidnapping or that the children were in danger, there was nothing they could do for at least 48 hours. As he sat alone in his empty house, surrounded by Christmas decorations and unopened presents that would never be opened by the family he had taken for granted, Alexander finally understood what he had lost. Not just a marriage he had been planning to end anyway, but his children, his beautiful, perfect daughters who had inherited his eyes and Diana's stubborn determination. The man who had spent Christmas Eve congratulating himself on his clever management of a complicated situation was gone. In his place sat someone he barely recognized, a father who had no idea where his children were spending Christmas night, and no way to find out. Outside, snow continued to fall on Pinehurst Estates, covering the evidence of his family's departure and leaving him alone with the devastating realization that some mistakes couldn't be undone with better lawyers or more convincing lies. His daughters were gone, and it was entirely his fault. 3 years later, Alexander Kane sat in a cramped studio apartment in Queens, staring at a laptop screen that displayed a news article he had read countless times over the past month. The headline read, "Former Manhattan Attorney Builds Multi-Million-Dollar Foundation to Combat Financial Abuse." The accompanying photograph showed a woman he barely recognized as his former wife. Diana Morrison, she had legally reclaimed her maiden name within 6 months of their separation, stood in front of a gleaming office building in Aspen, her chestnut hair shorter now, framing a face that radiated the kind of confidence he had never seen during their marriage. She was cutting a ribbon for something called the Blackwell Foundation, which the article described as providing comprehensive legal, financial, and therapeutic support for women and children escaping marriages where financial control had been weaponized against them. What made Alexander's chest ache with something deeper than regret was the smaller photo embedded in the article. Lily and Rose, now 6 years old, stood on either side of their mother wearing matching ski jackets and genuine smiles that spoke of children who felt completely secure in their world. Lily had grown tall and confident, her blonde hair longer now, her stance suggesting the kind of self-assurance that came from knowing she was unconditionally loved. Rose still possessed her gentle nature, but there was a strength in her expression that reminded Alexander painfully of Diana's determination. They were beautiful, thriving, and completely comfortable in a life that had been built without him. The article mentioned that the foundation operated from a sprawling ranch outside Aspen, where Diana and her daughters lived year-round, surrounded by the kind of natural beauty that provided both physical and emotional healing for families in transition. Alexander's phone rang, interrupting his daily ritual of torturing himself with glimpses of the life he had destroyed. The caller ID showed a number that had become both familiar and dreaded over the past 3 years, Charlotte Whitfield's law firm. "Mr. Kane, I have news regarding your daughters." Alexander's heart rate spiked instantly. Over the past 3 years, Charlotte had been his only connection to Lily and Rose, providing quarterly updates on their well-being and carefully edited photographs that proved they were happy without revealing specific details about their location or activities. These calls were simultaneously the highlight and the worst part of his existence. "Are they okay?" he asked, the question that haunted every moment of every day. "They're wonderful. But they've been asking more specific questions about you lately, and Diana believes they may be ready for limited supervised contact if you're interested." Alexander nearly dropped the phone. For 3 years, he had assumed his daughters had forgotten him completely, that Diana had crafted some explanation about why Daddy had disappeared from their lives. The possibility that they remembered him, that they wanted to know about him, was almost too overwhelming to process. What kind of contact? Video calls initially, supervised by a child psychologist who specializes in family reunification. Diana has been working with Dr. Patricia Wells to prepare for this possibility. Family reunification, as if his relationship with his daughters was something that could be rebuilt rather than something he had destroyed completely through his own selfishness. "What would I need to do?" Charlotte's voice became more formal, professional. "You'd need to complete a comprehensive psychological evaluation, attend counseling to address the behaviors that led to the family separation, and demonstrate consistent employment and stable housing. The process typically takes 6 months to a year." Alexander looked around his studio apartment with its Murphy bed and tiny kitchenette, then down at his uniform from the legal document processing company where he spent 40 hours a week doing paralegal work for $16 an hour. Stable housing and consistent employment were relative terms, but he had managed both for the past 18 months after his professional and personal life had completely imploded. "I'll do whatever you require," he said without hesitation. "Mr. Kane, I need you to understand something clearly. This isn't about reconciling with Diana or negotiating your divorce settlement. Diana remarried 2 years ago to a man who has been an exceptional father figure to your daughters. This process is solely about whether you can become a positive presence in Lily and Rose's lives." Remarried. The word hit him like a physical blow, though he had known intellectually that Diana would eventually find someone else, someone who deserved her trust, who would prioritize her and the twins above his own convenience, who could be the husband and father that Alexander had proven himself incapable of being. "I understand," he managed. "I just want to be part of their lives in whatever way is healthy for them." The psychological evaluation, when it began, was more difficult than anything Alexander had experienced during his professional disgrace. Dr. Michael Harrison, who specialized in treating men who had committed emotional and financial abuse, had no interest in Alexander's explanations or justifications. Instead, he forced him to confront the systematic ways he had prioritized his own desires over his family's well-being. "You didn't just have an affair," Dr. Harrison said during their 4th session. "You created a parallel life that required constant deception, financial manipulation, and emotional abandonment of your children. Those weren't mistakes or lapses in judgment. They were choices you made repeatedly over months." Week after week, Alexander was forced to examine the man he had become and the father he had never really been. He wrote letters to Lily and Rose that he wasn't allowed to send, practicing apologies for missing their childhood while they waited for a daddy who had chosen another woman over their needs. He role-played conversations about why Daddy hadn't been there for their birthdays, their first days of school, their nightmares, and scraped knees. 8 months later, Dr. Wells deemed him ready for supervised contact. The video call was arranged through a family services office in Manhattan, a neutral location that specialized in reunification cases. Alexander arrived 30 minutes early, wearing his best shirt and fighting nausea that had nothing to do with breakfast. When the screen flickered to life, showing a comfortable living room with mountain views visible through large windows, Alexander felt his breath catch. Lily and Rose sat on a leather couch beside Dr. Wells, looking like miniature versions of Diana but with expressions that were curious rather than fearful. "Hi, girls," he said, his voice shaking despite months of preparation. "Do you remember me?" Lily, always the more direct of the twins, studied him through the screen with serious blue eyes. "You're our first daddy," she said matter-of-factly. "Mama said you've been sick, but you're better now." Sick. It was such a gentle way to explain the devastation he had caused, so much kinder than the truth deserved. That's right, sweetheart. I've been sick, but I'm much better now. I've missed you both so much. Rose, still shy but equally direct, leaned forward toward the camera. Are you going to come see us? The question that mattered most, asked with the innocent hope that only children possessed. I hope so, baby girl. If you want me to, and if Mama and Dr. Wells think it's okay, maybe I can visit sometime. The call lasted 30 minutes and covered topics ranging from their new school to their horses to their stepfather Marcus, who apparently taught them to ski and helped with homework. After they signed off, Alexander sat in the family services office and cried harder than he had since the night he found Diana's letter. But these weren't tears of self-pity or rage. They were tears of gratitude, for an ex-wife who had protected their daughters while still leaving the door open for his redemption, and for two little girls who were willing to love a father who had failed them catastrophically. Over the following year, video calls became monthly events that Alexander planned his entire life around. Slowly, carefully, he began rebuilding relationships with daughters who were growing up to be strong, confident, and remarkably forgiving. They told him about their life in Colorado, their friends at school, their adventures with Marcus, who was teaching them to ride horses and camp in the mountains. 18 months after the first video call, Charlotte called with an offer that changed everything. Diana was willing to allow supervised in-person visits, with the understanding that Alexander would never again be a primary parent but could become a positive presence in their lives. The first visit took place in Denver on a crisp October afternoon. Alexander sat on a park bench watching Lily and Rose play on a jungle gym while Dr. Wells observed from a distance. When Rose fell and scraped her knee, she ran to him for comfort. When Lily wanted to show off her ability to cross the monkey bars, she called for him to watch. For 3 hours, he got to be their daddy again, not the man who had abandoned them, but the father they deserved to have. As the sun set behind the Rocky Mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Lily took his hand and looked up at him with devastating honesty. "Daddy, are you not sick anymore?" Alexander knelt down so he was at her eye level, understanding that his answer would define their relationship going forward. "I'm much better, sweetheart, and I promise you that I will never ever get that sick again. I love you and Rose more than anything in the whole world." She nodded solemnly, then hugged him with the fierce intensity of a 6-year-old who had decided to trust him again. It wasn't the life he had planned, but it was infinitely better than the one he had destroyed. And for the first time since that Christmas morning 3 years ago, Alexander Kane felt something he had forgotten existed: hope for a future where his daughters might forgive him enough to love him again, even if it could never be the way it was before. Coming up next, you'll see 2 more stories we handpicked just for you. If this one struck a chord, you're going to love what's next. Tap to keep the journey going.